Hello, this is a video on Fusion 360 designing foam board planes, and the specific topic is how do you unfold skins to get flat patterns. There's many ways to do this. This is this particular way that I do it, and you're free to edit and or uh, use these techniques and modify these techniques to your will and your project. So I'm not going to go over the whole design of an airplane. I'm just going to show you how I do a skin. I typically do my skins by lofting between former sketches. I'm not going to go over how you create a former sketch, um, but I will show you some details about my former sketches that I think are important. So this is my Fusion 360 project for a de Havilland DH100, and I basically want to make a skin between these two skins right here, just to demo how I do this. So you can see I have a former drawing here. The former drawing or sketch that I have an outer perimeter line, and then I have an inner perimeter line. Now, whenever I'm actually placing a former at a location, I will do the inner perimeter line on a nose piece like this, where you're just gluing skin to skin and there's no formers. I don't do this inner line, but essentially the distance between the outer line and the inner line is the thickness of Dollar Tree foam board, because the outer skin is the paper side of the foam board and the inner side is what you're crushing. So when I do my lofts, I do it from line to outer line, because that's the dimension that's not going to change because the paper stays intact. It's the inner dimension that changes as you crush the foam, if that makes sense. So when you flatten this out, you really want this outer surface and not what would be the inner surface had you extruded this skin to the thickness of Dollar Tree foam board. So I will just pull up one of my sketches real quick to show you something about them. I will turn off some of these other sketches. So this is just an offset from the outer line, and the outer line I drew based on a slice I took of a model. So on my outer one, I put a break in this outer loop. You can't flatten a complete circle loft. It has to be broken. The way I do that is I typically have a center line, and then I have a circle that I make off the very bottom point, because I want all the seams in my foam board to be at the bottom of my airplane, so that that's where the two ends will meet when I curve it and wrap it around the former. So I always take a 0.1 millimeter, I work in metric, circle, and I'll do a modify break to break this line at that circle, giving me a 0.1 millimeter gap across here between this side and that side. So I do that for every former that I'm going to loft a big full form around, so that you have something to flatten. So I wanted to show you that. If you look at the former over here, it's the same way. And you can see how when I loft it from one line to another, I do not include those two little segments in there. If that drawing was on, I had turned it off. I apologize. Let me turn that back on. So I don't, when you select this line and that line to do your loft, I don't include these two little segments here. In fact, you could probably delete them from your sketch if you want to, but sometimes I like to be able to have the entire round sketch for different purposes. So, and you can also delete the circle after you're done with it. On that instance, I didn't. It's not that big of a deal. So, in Fusion 360, I'm going to loft from this sketch to this sketch. I will go to the Surface Modeling tab, and I will choose Loft. Let me capture position real quick, because what's going on there? I moved some things around. This is just a demo, so I push the loft button. I'm gonna just hit revert position. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, so I choose one line here and one line over here, and boom, it lofts, right? So then I go over here. I just like to rotate so I can see what I'm doing. That was a point. I do not want that. you have to click on the line. So I do that, and I do this line over here, and boom, I have my loft. So you can look at the bottom of the loft and you can see there's a gap. So I was successful in making it wrap around completely and have a gap at the bottom, whereas where I want my scene to be when I roll this piece of flattened foam out. Now, let me go ahead and hit OK on that. I'm going to find this in the browser because I don't know where exactly I created it. Here's my new skin. I will export it by right-clicking and saying Save as Mesh. And I will do an export of file type object and hit OK. And I will save that file, and you can name these and do all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to save it to an existing DH100 folder that I have on my desktop. And I'm going to hit Save. I've already done this before as a test, so that's why it asked me if I want to overwrite. Okay, so there, now I've got this skin. So how do I flatten it? I've exported it as an object file. I use a third-party tool, and most people try to use Mesh Mixer and a bunch of other tools. I found one on a website of a college. It was a student that wrote this utility, and it's called Boundary First Flattening. And he was creating this utility basically to prove his algorithm for flattening three-dimensional objects based on the boundaries first, hence the name. So I downloaded that, and lo and behold, look what it does. You can load the mesh, the file that you exported, and it'll flatten it for you. Okay. So what I try to do is I try to stretch this out pretty big because I want a good sized file capture, and I'll do a screen grab. So I do a Command Shift 4. Boom. Since this is a college student's tool, he didn't really build any export capability in for the flat object, I don't believe. I think if you hit export mesh here and do an untitled object, I believe that object is not the flattened object. I believe it's just the original. Never actually tried that, but I always do a screen grab. So when I go, we can certainly take a look at that real quick, but we'll do that later. I'll show you how I do it. Okay, so once I'm in here, I go to my apologies. I like the solid view. I go to Insert Canvas, okay, and I browse to where I saved that image file, which in Mac I just go to Recents because that's where it is. It shows up easiest, fastest way to get to it. So, and I select a face that I'm going to insert that canvas onto. I just pick this guy. I grab this center square, drag it up where I can see it, and I do a diagonal rescale because I want it to stay symmetrical. I don't want to stretch one side versus the other. I want it to stay symmetrical. So I enlarge it just so I can see it. Okay. Now you need to scale this to the dimension of this. So how are you going to do that? Well, if you roll the plane over, you know a known flat edge that's straight that you can get a dimension off of is going to be this seam down here. And on different lofts it might be some different surface, but you always want to go for the straight edge of any loft and look at the dimensions. It's 22.401 millimeters. So I will scale that canvas to 22.401. So I'll go down here to the canvas, I will right click and hit Calibrate, okay, and then I'm going to go to here. I know this edge is 22.401, so I'll put 22.401 in there, hit enter, and now it's scaled to the actual size of what the flattened image would be. I might move that up just a little bit. You can hit edit canvas and drag it up a little, get it out of the way there. So the next thing I do is I do a drawing over this. So I go here and I say new drawing. I pick the same plane, okay, and I draw over this. Now I know that this edge is 22.401, so I'm going to make a line right here, okay, and I'm going to make it 22.401, and I'm going to line it up there and basically draw over this. And this is how you make your flat template. What I'll typically do is I'll make a line from here down to here, and let's see, there we go. And I like to draw a center line. If you bring your arrow down here, the triangle shows up, that's the center. And I like to do that. Okay, and then I'll fill these curves in. So this is kind of a weird shape, so I'm going to use what they call a spline, and I'm going to draw along there on 1/2 of it. Okay, so I like to do 1/2 and then mirror it to on that center line. So I'll just do that like this. Just come along here. This will work pretty good for you. There you go. And then boom, I'll do another spline here. I just kind of follow this like so. There we go. A little bit more. And I'll come right here and I'll say boom. That's off. That's okay. I'm just going to drag that point over after I drew it, and we'll move it. Maybe. Whoops. Wow, did I mess that up? All right. Let me get that line here moved over. There we go. That's all it should be. Okay. So now that I've got one side drawn, what I like to do is then do a mirror. Like I said, I'll grab these 3 lines, I'll hit mirror, and I will select the mirror line as this center line. Now I have a nice symmetrical part. I can go ahead and delete this guide that I used there. I can, just for the fun of it, trim that if I want. I like to put tick marks. That spot is a little off, so I'm going to move it out a little. I like to draw tick marks on this center line on the one edge and the other edge, like the Master Series plans have. They give you little guidelines for lining up the skins when you butt them against each other. So I typically try to do it straight. I typically do a 2mm little tick mark. Okay, it looks kind of big on there, but 2mm is not much. And then I'll delete this center line, and I've got these 2mm. My laser, when I cut it out, will make a little notch there, and that helps me line up one skin to the center of one skin to the center of the other. Okay, and that is it. I have my skin now. You can turn off this if you want. You can copy this and paste it onto a drawing somewhere, whatever. So that's how I do my skins. Okay, that's how I flatten them. Wings are similar. For a wing, I don't think I have my wing drawing. I do have my wing drawing on. I have bodies in them, but I don't have sketches turned on. Typically for wings, I have a rib, if you will, and I loft from one rib to another rib on a plane, and you can see I have an outer and an inner line on my rib, because the inner line is essentially the thickness of the foam board going in, and that's what you're crushing. So anywhere where I think I might put a physical rib in there, I want that inner line to make the rib, because you got to account for the thickness of the foam board. And that's it. That's how I do my recordings. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you learned something.